Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Thursday, April the 24th. And welcome to our commentary. We're getting a little bit of rain right now here in Texas or North Texas in the, let's say, 3:15, 3:30 time frame. It's supposed to stop by 5. I hope it does because I've got to go out tonight and teach a class. So I don't want to be caught up in the rain. Well, if you've been following what's happening on the Democrat side of the ledger, there's a lot of stuff happening on that side. And these are not very happy people on the other side. If you've been watching, there continues to be this conflict, between sort of a new generation, not necessarily younger, but just a new generation of people who want to see the party just be different. They're tired of the same party. And then you have some of the establishment, you might want to call them establishment, some of the incumbents who are frankly scared to death that they're going to have a primary next year. Somebody's going to show up at a primary and divide the party, and we've seen that happen before. In fact, that's how AOC became became a congresswoman. She challenged an established Democrat in the primary. Now, in all fairness, I don't think that Democrat took her seriously, and she was able to organize an effort, and he didn't take her seriously. He thought it was going to be another 10% primary turnout, and she made it a little bit better than that and was able to get in. But you now have the incumbent senator from Illinois, Durbin, who's going to be retiring. There are other Democrats too who have announced their retirements, and I think it's probably a combination of, like, Durbin's been there for 40 years, so he was going to retire anyway at some point, and he's probably going to be replaced by a Democrat. So I don't think he's too worried about, or the party's too worried about losing that seat in Illinois. But this battle in the Democrat Party is quite a battle, and it's sort of tearing up the party apart. And I don't know if you saw this fellow David Hogg, Hogg, who was on TV over the weekend. He's like the number two guy in the party, I guess, in the leadership of the party, not in the Congress, I mean, but in the organization of the party. And they were challenging him as to why is he calling for primary challenges? Why does he want to spend money on primary challenges? And one of the people challenging him is James Carville. And he basically said, well, look at our ratings, 29, 25, whatever. He's got a point. When you've got ratings like that, that's an indictment that people are not happy with who you are and what you're trying to do. I think the problem with the party is that they don't really know what kind of party they're going to be, or they don't really know what kind of party they want to be. And that's why I think, and it may be a little premature to say this, but I think there is a chance that this party actually splits into a couple of parties, a more center left party, and then the more radical left party, because I don't see how you reconcile some of these differences. I mean, it's going to be very tough to do that, especially if they take out a bunch of incumbents in the next primaries. Now, if they take out some incumbents, that's going to reduce their chances, I think, of taking the House, because some of the incumbents they're going to be taking out are probably more winnable options than whoever's going to win that primary. So it's fascinating what's happening on the Democrat side. And as I say, it's not getting any better. Not getting any better. Now, I was listening to a podcast, Ruthless podcast, this morning. And one of the fellows on that podcast, I don't remember the name, he said something along the lines that the party has to be honest with itself, that they have to look at themselves and say to themselves, number one, we protected President Biden, which they did, by the way, and they chose the wrong person in Vice President Harris, which obviously they did. And when you look as to why they protected President Biden, I mean, if you just sit back for a second and say, why did they protect President Biden? Why did they go out of their way in 2020 to get him nominated and to get him elected? Why did they do that? Because of this hysterical fear that they had of Donald Trump. They thought that preventing Trump from returning to the White House was worth any price, including hanging on to a candidate who didn't have a chance of making it. So they're going to have to deal with this. They're going to have to deal with it. And it's not an easy thing to do. And that's why I continue to believe that there may very well be a situation down the road where this party splits. Now, maybe it won't be in 2026, but the real challenge for them is going to be in 2028 when they get to that convention. And you have these two groups who are not going to be getting along any better in 2028 and they're getting along now. And I look at the party's potential candidates and I ask myself, okay, who could be the moderate? Who could be the moderate who could bring, all of these groups together? Who could be that one person who could bring these groups together? I don't see any. I don't see any. Now, everybody talks about Shapiro, but we'll see. We'll see how Shapiro looks in a couple of years. The last time that Shapiro won the election, which would have been in 22, he ran against a really bad Republican candidate. I mean, that was not a tough nut to crack for Shapiro in 20. That would have been 2022. That was not a tough nut to crack. He won a fairly easy reelection because, again, he ran against a pretty weak Republican. But Pennsylvania is becoming more and more Republican, and either Shapiro moves to the right and decides to join the rest of the state, or he's going to have a lot of his legislation turned down by the local legislature, and he's going to have a very combative session as the governor. I don't know. He certainly is the one that everybody's thinking about as far as the Democrats are concerned. The other one is Bashir of Kentucky, but he's got all of the right. He looks fine. He represents a red state. You would think, wow, here's a red state Democrat who looks good, who's telegenic. His problem is that I don't think he could win Kentucky in a general election. I don't think he could. I think his chances of winning Kentucky against, let's say, J.D. Vance or any other Republican would probably not be very good. So the Democrats have their problems, have some real problems. Now, Trump has some challenges too in governing and getting some things done. The Republican Congress has a challenge. They've got to get that budget and that reconciliation bill through. So everybody's got challenges at the moment. But I like I'd rather have the Republican hand right now than the Democrat hand, because at least the Republicans have a good chance of succeeding. The Democrats, I'm not sure what's going to happen. What's going to happen to them? I really don't know. So we'll see. We'll keep an eye on it. But things on the other side, things on the Democrat side, are really, really very contentious right now, to say the least. Well, there's a huge case right now in front of the Supreme Court. Maybe you've been following it. And it has to do with parents and school districts, and it has to do with a bunch of books. Excuse me, with a bunch of books that parents don't want their kids to read. These LGBT or whatever they are books. And frankly, I'm with the parents on this. We're talking here about 4, 5, 6-year-old kids, or 4th, 5th, 6th grade, I believe. I'm not sure which one, but it's pretty young kids, to say the least. And why would you expose kids to all that stuff? You really shouldn't. It shouldn't be, you just should not allow that to happen at all. The parents should decide or should teach the kids about sexuality, not the school. Not the school. That's not something for the classroom. That's not something that those kids ought to be learning. And I think what's upsetting a lot of parents is the attitude of the school district, that the school district is basically saying, well, if you don't like our schools, you can look for another one. Well, that's not really an option for most people. That's not an option for most people. In fact, most people have to either pay very expensive rates to go to a private school, or they have to go to a public school. But if the public schools are going to be teaching you this kind of stuff, then, the parents are going to object. So we'll see how it turns out. But I think the parents I sense that there's a victory here coming for the parents. I really do. And that could be a case that could have tremendous impact across the country. I'm going to try to see if we can find someone to talk about that case and discuss it in further detail, because I think it's going to be a case that will have national implications, particularly if the Supreme Court rules in favor of the parents, and I think they will. I think they will. I think they're going to rule in favor of the parents. I have a post over at the American Thinker today talking about these public announcements that Secretary Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary, has been making, and these are announcements basically saying, don't come to the United States illegally, or fill out this information on this app and leave the country on your own, and then that way you can come back legally someday. Well, these ads are being run in Mexico, and apparently the Mexican government is not happy with it, and that's what my post is about. The Mexican government is not happy with these ads. They don't want these ads that run in Mexico. So the president of Mexico is trying to go to their Congress to get these ads off Mexican TV. And we'll see how that turns out. But apparently they don't like these ads in Mexico. They feel that they are derogatory against migrants. I don't think they are. But anyway, that's what they think down there. We'll see. We'll see how that turns out. The president of Mexico is apparently going to go to the Congress and say, these ads cannot be run on Mexican television. We'll see how it turns out. I'll let you know. Well, one thing about On This Day in History, we always like to leave you with an On This Day in History moment. Well, I'm going to take you back to 1980. That's a long time ago. It's 45 years ago, but I remember this. It was 45 years ago that we woke up to find out that the rescue mission in Iran had failed. As you may remember, we had hostages in Iran, and President Carter approved a rescue mission where we put some special forces in Iran to rescue these people. It completely blew up in their face because there were some technical problems, and then one helicopter crashed with another helicopter. The whole thing was a disaster. Several of the special forces were killed, and the whole thing was a disaster. And I'll never forget President Carter addressing the nation very early in the morning, basically giving us the news that the mission had failed and that the soldiers had been pulled out. But I think from that moment on, his presidency was in bad shape. It was already in pretty bad shape before that. But I think that was the point where it just it was kind of automatic, I guess, at that point, that he would not win the election, or he would not win re-election, because it just seemed there was a time there where everything was not working for President Carter. No matter what he did, was not working. And I think this one was kind of like the most critical one, the rescue mission. And even though, it's hard to blame President Carter for the failure itself, because it was a failure on the ground, not necessarily a bad decision, but it just contributed to the image that he could not get things done. And as a consequence, he was defeated pretty easily by then Governor Reagan in November. But I remember this morning, 45 years ago, and I remember turning on the TV and watching President Carter address the nation. Pretty sad situation for the country, and of course for the heroes who were killed that day. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.